studying your last two. I swim med when I turned in. The staring down to mute. And can learn a pole that some kid died.
One of the most important principles in professional tax planning is this: you advise, the client decides, and you document. As tax professionals, our role is not to make financial decisions for our clients. Our role is to provide information, explain options, compare outcomes, and help clients understand the consequences of their choices. At the center of this slide, you can see a tax advisor meeting with a client. Notice that the advisor is presenting multiple options. In this example, the options include taking compensation through salary, dividends, or a combination of both. The advisor's responsibility is to explain each option clearly. The client's responsibility is to decide which option best aligns with their goals, preferences, and circumstances. This distinction is extremely important. On the left side of the slide, we see behaviors that professionals must avoid. An advisor should never force their preferred option on a client. They should never hide alternatives. They should never assume they know what the client wants. And they should never make decisions on behalf of the client. Even when an advisor believes one option may be better, the final decision always belongs to the client. Why? Because tax planning is not only about taxes. It is also about retirement goals, risk tolerance, family priorities, lifestyle preferences, and personal values. Two clients with exactly the same numbers may choose completely different strategies. That is why client autonomy is so important. On the right side of the slide, we see the behaviors of a professional advisor. A professional presents accurate numbers. They build multiple scenarios. They explain long-term consequences. They answer questions honestly. And most importantly, they respect the client's choice. The large message in the center summarizes the entire process. First, you advise. Second, the client decides. Third, you document. This final step is often overlooked, but it is essential. A documented decision protects both the client and the advisor. It creates clarity, accountability, and a record of what was discussed and why a particular choice was made. At the bottom of the slide, the balance scale represents another important idea. The advisor's opinion and the client's goals must remain balanced. Professional advice should inform decisions. It should never replace them. The best tax advisors do not tell clients what to do. They help clients understand their options, evaluate the trade-offs, and make informed decisions that fit their unique circumstances. As you continue developing your tax planning skills, remember this principle: your job is not to choose. Your job is to educate, explain, and guide. The client chooses the path, and you document the journey. Now that we understand the principle that the client makes the final decision, the next question is, how should a professional tax advisor guide that decision-making process? The answer is simple: present options, not answers. This slide illustrates the professional workflow that advisors should follow when helping clients make important tax and compensation decisions. The process begins with gathering information. Before discussing strategies, you must understand the client's complete situation. This includes their family circumstances, business details, income sources, retirement objectives, and long-term goals. Good decisions start with good information. Once the facts are gathered, the next step is to build multiple scenarios. Rather than presenting a single recommendation, a professional advisor explores different possibilities. For example, a client may receive compensation through salary, dividends, or a combination of both. Each option produces different outcomes. Your role is to model those outcomes and make them visible. The third step is to explain the consequences. This is where professional value is created. You help the client understand not only the current tax impact, but also the long-term effects. You compare factors such as current tax costs, future tax implications, CPP contributions, RRSP room, retirement income, and cash flow needs. The goal is not to tell the client which option is best. The goal is to help the client understand the trade-offs. Next, the client evaluates their priorities. This is where personal preferences come into play. Some clients prioritize tax savings. Others prioritize retirement security. Some value immediate cash flow. Others focus on family needs or risk reduction. Two clients with identical numbers may make completely different choices because their goals are different. That is why there is rarely one universally correct answer. After considering the information and evaluating their priorities, the client makes the decision. Notice that the advisor is not selecting the option. The client is. The advisor's responsibility is to ensure the client understands the available choices and their consequences. Once the decision is made, the advisor implements the plan and continues to monitor and review it over time. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the complete planning workflow. Gather facts, create options, explain outcomes, client chooses, implement the plan. This sequence is the foundation of ethical and professional tax planning. The important message highlighted on the slide is worth repeating. There is rarely one universally correct answer. Different clients with identical financial situations may choose different strategies, and both choices can be correct. The final message at the bottom captures the advisor's true role. You provide clarity. The client provides direction. You inform. You explain. You respect. And you document. That is how professional advisors help clients make informed decisions while preserving the client's right to choose their own path. Up to this point, we've learned that the advisor's role is to provide information, explain options, and allow the client to make the final decision. But there is one final step that separates a good advisor from a great advisor: documentation. This slide explains why documentation is one of the most important professional habits you can develop. On the left side of the slide, we see a situation with no documentation. Imagine a conversation that took place several years ago. Different options were discussed. A decision was made. The strategy was implemented, but nothing was properly documented. Now, years later, the client asks, "Why did you do this?" Without documentation, memories fade. People remember conversations differently. Important details are lost, and misunderstandings begin to appear. What started as a simple discussion can quickly become a disagreement. This creates risk for both the client and the advisor. As shown on the slide, the consequences can include complaints, misunderstandings, professional liability, and unnecessary stress. Now look at the right side of the slide. This is the same situation handled professionally. The advisor has a complete record of the planning process. The file shows the options that were presented, the pros and cons that were discussed, the consequences that were explained, the client's final decision, and confirmation that the client understood and approved the chosen strategy. Years later, there is no confusion. There is clarity. The documentation tells the story. The advisor can demonstrate exactly what information was provided, what alternatives were considered, and why the final decision was made. In the center of the slide, the timeline highlights the complete process. First comes the discussion, then the decision, then the documentation. And when questions arise years later, The documentation becomes a form of professional protection. This is why experienced advisors often say, "If it isn't documented, it didn't happen." That statement may sound extreme, but it reflects an important reality of professional practice. Documentation creates evidence. It protects the advisor from misunderstandings. It protects the client from confusion. And it creates a reliable record that can be reviewed in the future. At the bottom of the slide, the shield represents the 4 pillars of professional protection. Document the options that were presented. Document the consequences that were explained. Document the client's decision. And maintain organized records. When these 4 elements are present, both the client and the advisor are protected. The final message of this slide summarizes the entire section. A great tax professional does 4 things. They present information. They respect client autonomy. They document every important decision. And they protect both the client and themselves. Remember, clients make decisions. Advisors provide guidance. But documentation preserves the story. And in professional practice, that story may become your most valuable protection years down the road.